How are y'all? Wow, that's loud, isn't it? I'm usually loud, but not usually that loud. Here's my task from Alexandra. I'm supposed to talk about the intersection between personality and spirituality in relation to community. That's kind of what I thought. Wow. The intersection between personality and spirituality in relation to community. So I'm going to make every effort to do that, probably talking about something that you've never heard of before. How many of you have ever heard of the Enneagram? Oh, thank you. Do you know your number? You do? What is it? Okay. Anybody else ever heard of it? This is my husband, Joe. Joe is the pastor of Cochran Chapel United Methodist Church, and we are the oldest deeded Christian church in Dallas. And we're older than Texas. And he also is an adjunct professor at Perkins. And he hangs out with me sometimes when he has time, and it's always a gift for me. We have 4 children and 6 grandchildren under 6. And 3 of our children live close by, and they're the 3 who each have 2 children. So all the grandchildren are close by. Our life is very full. I travel a lot. I work 42 weekends a year, teaching on the road or on the road, occasionally at home, and lots during the week. And so we go with one another when we can, because that's our opportunity to be with one another, because these days we're both very, very busy. So to begin to try to talk about what is mine to talk about today, I'm going to start off by avoiding that for a few minutes and talking to you about another word that you might not be familiar with, and that word is holon. And it's spelled Holon. And a holon is a term for a discovery that scientists have made, that there's nothing in the universe that they can find that is not both whole and complete within itself, and at the same time part of a greater whole. All to say that everything is whole and complete in itself, and yet it's part of something else too. And all of that is for us to look at in terms of any misconception that we have that the way we are in the world, or what we do, or how we are affects only us, is always wrong. Because everything we do affects us and also affects other people. I don't know if you've ever read any work by Father Richard Rohr. He's a Franciscan priest who's a prolific writer and who is a great theologian of our time. And he happens to be our spiritual director, and he's been our spiritual director for a long time. And Father Rohr, years ago, said to me, I really think you need to learn the Enneagram. And I said, I don't have time. And he said, well, I really think you need to make time. And so I started to read a little bit, and he is an Enneagram master. And so the more I read, the more I decided that maybe he was right. And so I, too, have become an Enneagram master. There are not very many of us. There are Enneagram teachers and Enneagram masters, and people who are talking about the Enneagram who know nothing about it. And the people who are talking about it who know nothing about it make it fairly difficult for those of us who are teachers and Enneagram masters. The Enneagram is between 3,000 and 4,000 years old, more likely closer to 4,000 years old. And it has existed through all faith beliefs and across many different cultures for all of these thousands of years. But the only way we know that is because there are spiritual teachers who have left notes or who have left their journals, and their journals all, not everyone, but many of them had journals that referenced the Enneagram. Nothing was ever published, written down and published about the Enneagram until the late 1970s. And probably the father of the modern Enneagram is a kind of a interesting, spiritual, quest kind of guy whose name is Gurdjieff. And he used the Enneagram quite a bit, and he taught it to a guy whose name was Naranjo, who was in South America for a time, who went to California to teach the Enneagram to a group of Jesuit priests and 2 therapists. And they were all there to learn it so that they could use it as spiritual directors for their directees. Father Rohr's spiritual director was one of those Jesuit priests. That's how Father Rohr learned it. He was our spiritual director, and that's how I learned it. I've been teaching 20 years. The reason I started talking about the holon piece to begin with is because the Enneagram, if you look at the whole thing, kind of represents all of humanity. And there are 9 different ways that we have of being in relationship to the world and being in relationship to one another. I've taught the Enneagram in Europe. The last time I was in Europe, I taught it to people from 21 different countries who spoke 17 different languages. Everybody always gets it across the board. It is a universal language that works everywhere. The only term I've ever used teaching the Enneagram that didn't translate was peeping Tom. And the French have no concept of peeping Tom. And I thought, well, surely they do. So I just changed it to peeping Pierre. But that wasn't helpful to them. It made absolutely no difference. But other than that, everything I've used in international circles to teach the Enneagram, the language just translates when I have translators in the room who do that well. So, it's so easy to be wary of things that we don't know anything about, that we've never heard of, that have a symbol that sort of looks like a pentagram. That's a real downside for me lots of times. Enneagram simply means 9 points. It's Greek for 9 points. And there are 9 points on the Enneagram that you see up there, or the one that you have in your hand. I guarantee you, absolute guarantee, that your personality fits one of those 9 spaces. And it has been your personality defined by one of those 9 spaces since you were 5. By the time you're 5, it's pretty well determined. It's part genetic and it's part environmental. You kind of work on it and hone it and work with it between the ages of 5 and 15. And then you live the rest of your life dealing with this piece about you that is your personality. Now, a really important thing to understand about that, though, is it's your personality, it's not your essence. And so it's very, very significant that your personality is all of the masks that you've put on since you were a child to make your way in the world. But all of that covers your essence. And in the second half of life, which many of you might be joining me there, in the second half of life, what we intuitively do is let go of those pieces of personality so that we can get back to essence. The fact that we intuitively do it means that not everybody in the world needs to know the Enneagram, and that's good because most people don't. But if you do know it, then it helps you a great deal in letting those pieces of personality fall away so that you can get back to who you were before you did anything wrong and before you did anything right. So let's talk about that for a minute. I'm a minister's wife. I got to tell you that growing up, I really never thought, I think I'd like to be a minister's wife when I grow up. And I'm from a little town in the Panhandle. I'm from Floydada, Texas. My mom and dad built the first hospital there in 1931. And there are only 5,000 people in Floydada, and they all knew me. And I don't think any of them ever said to one another, wouldn't Suzanne make a good minister's wife? I was pretty feisty. I came out of Floydada and went to SMU and was the first head women's basketball coach at SMU after Title IX. And then I taught theology in a Catholic high school, and then I started a nonprofit for the elderly poor. And I've done a lot of different things. But in order for me to be I wouldn't say a good minister's wife, but in order for me to be an appropriate minister's wife, I kind of have to put on some things that are not my nature. Like I have to sometimes not say what I think. And sometimes it's best if I don't say what I think God thinks. And if we have an antagonist who's acting out, it's for sure best if I don't say anything about that. And that's probably my weakest spot. And so if you use that example, you've done it too. You've behaved differently at work than you do at home. You've behaved differently in different groups of people in order to be appropriate and to get by. Well, we've been doing all of that behaving differently since we were little bitty. So an example might be, let's say we have a mom who has a headache and she's laying in bed, and a happy little boy who's jumping on the bed. And the little boy just wants to jump on the bed. And the mom has a headache and she says, "Stop jumping on the bed." And the little boy wants to jump on the bed, thinks it's fine to jump on the bed, but mom's the caregiver, and that relationship has to be maintained, so he stops jumping on the bed. Our 4 children, we have 2 girls and then 2 boys, and I can literally remember one day walking out of church saying to this boy, Joel, "You need to talk to more people," and saying to this boy, BJ, "You need to talk to fewer people." Well, all of that is us encouraging children to behave in the ways that they're not inclined to behave. And every time they do that, when we tell them to, they put on a layer of personality. So by the time you get to midlife, you're pretty layered up in how you are in the world. The Enneagram defines that personality for you. Now, that personality, as I said earlier, is how we interact with the world and how we interact with each other. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Enneagram. The good news is I can do a fairly good job of talking a little bit about it in a short time. The bad news is, if you really want to learn your Enneagram number, it takes 8 hours. And I could do 8, but probably y'all are not prepared for that. So Alexandra and I are talking about me coming back and doing 8. I can't do it on a Saturday because I'm full for all this year and already and half of next year, but I could do 2 nights back to back, 4 hours each night. So I'm going to encourage you right now, if that happens, to come. And after I finish talking, I suspect that you will help me encourage Alexandra to have that happen. I could give you 100 reasons why I want you to know your Enneagram number. I'll give you 5. We've divided enough. There are 39,000 distinctly different Christian denominations in the world. Good grief. And do you suppose we've divided 39,000 times over the Sermon on the Mount, or, well, of course not. We've divided on who's in and who's out. We've divided over dipping and sipping. We've divided over dunking and pouring and sprinkling. And mostly we divide over really important things like the color of the carpet in Fellowship Hall and who's going to touch what things in the kitchen, because you know these things are for this class. At the church we currently serve, there are all these cabinets in the kitchen that are marked this class only with their class name. And it says, "Do not touch." So do you know what the pastor's wife does? I just go in there and touch them all. I open the cabinets and just touch. And then I leave feeling so much better. I don't steal, I just touch. And yet, we're putting out this thing about how welcoming we are. Come as you are, open doors, open hearts, open minds. Really? That's not my experience. But if we're going to be that, and if we're going to do that, this is the best tool we've got going. And so I'm going to try to tell you why. So no, I'm going to give you a little taste. You know, do any of you shop at Central Market? Do you ever just want to, after you get the toothpick and you've done whatever's there, do you ever kind of just want to keep getting a little more and a little more, and so you look to see if anybody else is looking and you think, well, I could do one more piece of pineapple. It's so good, or 2. Well, I'm hoping that as I go through a little bit about each number, it's going to make you want one more and one more and one more. Let's start at the top. The Enneagram, all those 9 numbers, one of those is you. And the great thing about this particular spiritual tool is that the best part of you is also the worst part of you. So you can't get rid of it. We culturally want to get rid of everything that doesn't work for us, right? So if we don't like a part of ourselves, we just want to get it fixed, or we get rid of it, or we hide it, or we put it away. Well, you can't do that once you understand the Enneagram, because the best part of you and the worst part of you are the same thing. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit by talking about my number, and then we'll move to the top. I'm a 2 on the Enneagram, and 2s are givers, and they really, at the end of the day, more than anything, just want you to love them. They want you to want them, and they want you to love them, and that's their motivation. Enneagram is not determined by behavior. It's determined by motivation. So you can't go around assigning numbers to other people based on behavior that I share with you because you don't know what their motivation is. Joe and I do many of the same things because we're both other referenced, but our motives are not the same, and so we're not the same number on the Enneagram. The reason the Enneagram answers the question, what is the intersection between personality and spirituality in relation to community? And the reason that that's important is because the intersection in community has everything to do with how much compassion and understanding we have for one another. Nothing, I would bet my life on this, nothing stops criticism and small thinking about other people quicker than the Enneagram does. Because even with the little bit that I'm going to give you, by the time you walk out of here today, I hope you know this. There are 8 other ways of seeing the world other than the way you see the world. And there are 8 other ways of processing the information you take in as you see the world other than the way you process information. And so that means when we look at the same thing or hear the same thing or have the same experience, we absolutely don't do the same thing with it because we don't really see and hear the same thing. All right, so move to the top of the Enneagram. 8s, 9s, and 1s are up there. The Enneagram is divided into triads, and that at the top is called the Gut Triad. And that's because people who are either an 8 or a 9 or a 1 take in information kind of right here. It's like a blow to them. So they're hypervigilant about who they can trust and who they shouldn't trust and who has a hidden agenda. But all of that's kind of a feeling thing for them. And that's also called the anger triad because for those 3 people or types of people, anger is their big issue. But listen to how that works out. For 8s, anger is straight up anger. They get mad at you and you know they're angry. And then when they're done, they're done. So if you've had a little tiff with somebody and they were angry and you're driving home thinking, boy, I sure hope Mike's not still mad at me about that. If Mike's an 8, he's driving home not thinking about me at all. Because really, we're not all that important to 8s. Okay? So their anger's straight up and straight down. They're the most aggressive number on the Enneagram, and they're the only number on the Enneagram that really likes their number. They think their number's the best, and they feel sorry for everybody else that we're not that number. All the rest of us, when we hear our number taught for the full 40 minutes, we get a little bit embarrassed and think, gosh, I don't know how she knows that about me, and I certainly don't want anybody else to know. But 8s kind of sit proudly and look at you like, wow, not you? Sorry. All right, next to 8s is 9s, and that's Joe. So, of course, I could tell you stories till the time's up, but I'm going to move quickly. But Joe also is in the anger triad, but 9s are the most laid-back number on the Enneagram. They don't get whipped up about anything. You can't even get them whipped up about anything. And they kind of think the rest of us are putting too much energy into things we can't really do anything about and things that are not really all that important. And they also, though, are angry. Their anger, though, is not straight-up anger. Their anger is passive-aggressive anger. So this is kind of what that looks like. Joe and I, on these crazy schedules we have, when he leaves home, I office at home, and when he leaves home, he usually calls me about an hour after he leaves. That's kind of a 25-year practice for us, actually. So let's say he leaves the house at 6:30 because he's got to go to the hospital. So I would expect to hear from him between 7:30 and 8, 8:30, 9, 9:30, the phone might ring, and Joe would say, hi, darling, how's your morning? Good. How's yours? Fine. Are you mad at me? Why, no. What would make you think that? Well, it's 9:45. Look at the time. It is. Oh, Sandra's buzzing me, gotta go. Now, here's what that means for a 9. That means, yes, I'm angry with you, and I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to work it out. I don't want to hear your side. I want you to know that I'm angry, and then I want us to just kind of move on. They're the kind of people who we talk about that they let bygones be bygones, but no. No, they're carrying bygones like arrows in a quiver right here on their backs, and they'll leave them there forever. Or if you say, like, we have a deal that we do 2 nights a week together, period. And if you give away one of those nights, then you have to replace it with another night during the week. So let's say I come to Joe and say, my feelings are really hurt because we were supposed to do something on Monday and Thursday this week, and you had an emergency Monday and you didn't replace that, and then you scheduled something on Thursday. Really, my feelings are kind of hurt. And he'll say, I know just what you mean. Because on November the 13th, you and I had dinner scheduled, and you scheduled a meeting. And then on October the 9th, now, so you see, that's a completely different kind of anger and a completely different person, completely different. Motivation for 8s is they believe that everybody's going to betray them. So they want to hear and believe that they will not be betrayed. Motivation for 9s is they don't think their presence matters. So they want to hear and believe that their presence matters. They are 2 completely different kinds of people. Here's what 8s usually say about 9s. They don't have an opinion about anything. I find that to be just ridiculous. Here's what 9s say about 8s. They're too quick to jump to conclusions and just go ahead and act without checking with other people. That seems irresponsible. Until 8s understand 9s and 9 understands 8s, and then they say, oh, she's just an 8 or he's just a 9. Okay, 1s are next. And 1s are angry too. They're in the anger triad, but they're also in the gut triad. 1s have this very unique thing going on for them, and that is that since they were children, they have this constant critical voice that rah-rahs at them all day long. And the voice is almost always putting them down and telling they did things wrong and telling they did things ineffectively and telling them they're no good. And they've heard those voices for so long. Number 1, they think the rest of us hear them, and we don't. And number 2, they think that the voices are their friend. They, because of the voices, end up being angry because their goal in life is perfection for all things. And they're very frustrated that things aren't perfect, particularly that they're not perfect. And so since they're so upset that things are not perfect, what they end up doing is becoming hypercritical and needing to fix everything. And then they get mad at us because we're not perfect, and it makes them just kind of resentful. And so resentment is really their problem, because they stuff all their anger because they think it wouldn't be appropriate to be angry. And then resentment comes out in ways at unexpected times, aimed at unexpected people, and they're very seldom angry at what they're angry at. So their motivation is to hear and believe the words, you are good. So everything they perfect and everything they do is just because they want us to tell them they're good, because that's a message they didn't get in childhood. So in that group up there at the top of the Enneagram, you've got 8s, 9s, and 1s. They're all struggling with anger. They all struggle with it in a different way. 1s end up being highly critical of other people. Why? Because they've got a constant voice that's highly critical of them. 9s end up giving other people lots and lots of room. Why? Because at the end of the day, more than anything, they want to avoid conflict. 8s get their energy from conflict and from people disagreeing. So if everybody's getting along, 8s kind of take a different stand just to get everybody whipped up, because that's where all the energy is. So you've heard 5 minutes about 3 numbers. I could teach you 40 minutes about each one, and then you'd really get it. Okay, now let's think again about the question. I'm sorry, I have to keep returning to it. The intersection between personality and spirituality in relation to community. Okay. When your personality, if you're an 8 or a 9 or a 1, is on a spiritual journey, you do those in 3 different ways. 8s don't like quiet time. They don't like to be self-reflective. They don't like to look inward, because what happens when they stop and look inside is they're aware that all these people got their feelings hurt somehow in relationship with them, and they didn't mean to hurt anybody's feelings. So they don't really know what to do with that. So they kind of avoid quiet time and an inner journey, and they just keep going and going and going and going and going until they drop. 9s don't want to have any conflict. And in terms of spirituality, Joe and I used to give a lot of prayer retreats. You know, the church tells us we should pray all the time, but then it doesn't teach us how. You know, you can only say the Our Father so many times, and then I'm sorry, but really? It doesn't mean anything to me after 25 times in a week. So we started giving these prayer retreats, and we would teach people a prayer method, and then we'd send them out to pray, and they'd all come back. And it was before I knew the Enneagram. And somebody would come back and say, that was fantastic. Are we going to do that again? And I would say, sure. And the next person would come dragging in and say, oh my gosh, are we going to do that again? So Joe and I would go home back to the drawing board to try to figure out what kind of retreat we could give that would please everybody, right? We'd go do it again, get the same result. All right, so imagine that Joe's taught some prayer method. We've sent everybody out to pray, and here's what happens. 8s get out there, and they get real quiet. They got 45 minutes, and they're really quiet during that time, and here's what they're thinking. You know, that woman, I think I really hurt her feelings. I don't know what I did. I have so many things to do. I can't believe I'm here wasting time doing this. And you know, I think on the tennis courts the other day, I really offended my friends. I don't quite know what to do about that. I wouldn't mean to offend them. I think I might have. I don't know what to do with that. And I have so much to do. I really shouldn't be here, et cetera, et cetera. 9s, when they don't have anybody to merge with, because that's what they do, they kind of go along to get along, they go out to practice a prayer method and generally sleep. They either go to sleep literally or figuratively, so they kind of come in stretching and say, oh, that was a great experience. Are we going to do that again? Now think about what I've done to the 1s. We sent them out for 45 minutes. No noise, nobody, nothing. And their voices just said, you're such a schmuck. Everybody else is sitting at a table. You're on the ground. Why are you in the shade? God's in the sunshine. Why are you doing this? You should be doing that. You're terrible. Why are you on a prayer retreat? You ought to already know how to pray. So they come back in just all beat up and say, are we going to do that again? Because I don't really think I can. Okay, if you don't know the Enneagram and you don't know what's happening inside all of those people, then how much compassion do you have for the people who look like they dozed off a little? Or the people who come back feeling kind of aggressive and like they've been wasting their time? Or the people who come back and say, man, I don't want to do that again. All right, move on around the Enneagram to 2s, 3s, and 4s. That's the relationship triad. And 2s, 3s, and 4s are also referred to as the feeling types. I like the word relationship better than feeling type. I think that's more accurate, and so I'm going to kind of go with that. And I'm going to talk to you about all 3 numbers for a little bit. 2s are the people in the world who at the end of the day want to be loved and wanted. So they pride themselves on being able to know what you need and then meet your need. And they intuitively know what you need. So they don't have to work very hard at that. They can just kind of figure out ahead of time that you might need this or you might want this. And so they help you. You remember I told you that your Enneagram personality or your Enneagram number is the best part of you and the worst part of you? My kids, not too long, maybe 6 years ago, I guess, gave me a Mother's Day gift that is a watercolor. And it has a man and a woman and 4 kids and a church and a house and a dog. And at the bottom it says, there's nobody who comes here who doesn't know that that's you right there at the center making a home for all of us. Now that's 2 territory. It's like, yes, I am. And aren't I doing a good job? Don't I love you well? And sometimes I do love them very well. And sometimes my giving is manipulative. And sometimes it's because I want something back. And sometimes I give to control. And so the best part of me is that I'm a giver and I'm intuitive about what you need. And the worst part of me is that I'm a giver and I'm intuitive about what you need. And so we have to get to what my motivation is behind that. So 2s are the people who are always here. They're in the church kitchen. They're always here, always volunteering, always doing. Sometimes because it's theirs to do, and sometimes for other reasons that are not quite so lovely. 3s on the Enneagram. I'll start off telling you about 3s by telling you that Enneagram masters a long time ago assigned numbers to countries. And the United States is a 3 country, and Dallas is a 3 city. So if you're a 3 on the Enneagram and you live in Dallas, or Plano's a 3 city, if you live in these places, and I don't know if you'll pick up on this or not. I don't know if you have enough Enneagram information to do it, but let me just tell you, Richardson is not a 3 city. There's a difference there. Irving is not a 3 city. Fort Worth is not a 3 city, okay? If, I always say to the 3s, if you're a 3 on the Enneagram and you live in Dallas, Texas, in the United States, it's like an alcoholic who lives above the bar. Because you're right steeped in all the things that have to do with image, and that's what you need to try to let go of. 3s are people who spend most of their energy on the outside of the cup, not the inside. So they're always dressing themselves up to try to be what they think we want them to be. And they're usually quite good at it. But because they can alter themselves to be what they think we want them to be, and because we ascribe to the world the way we are, they have a tendency to be a little bit suspicious of other people. Because if they can become the poster child for Baylor Hospital and the poster child for Christ United Methodist Church and the poster child for their sorority group, and those are all 3 very different personalities, then they think the rest of us can dress up that way too. So 3s on the Enneagram, their common problem is deceit, but it's self-deceit. And it's when they deceive themselves into thinking that they are who they pretend to be. And then they begin to think there's nothing behind that. So here's what you've probably said about 3s quietly to the person you trust. I don't know, he's so full of himself, he always thinks he has the answer for everything, and he's always just too dressed up for me, and I don't trust all that slick stuff. That's what we say about 3s. You know what we say about female 8s? She's such a bitch. I'm sorry to use the word bitch, but you know, I tried to come up with other words, and no other word works for bitch. I want you to think about that. If I used any other word, you wouldn't know what I meant. She's pushy, well, that doesn't really get it, does it? 8s, young 8s come to me tearfully and say, females only, people have been calling me a bitch since I was in the 4th grade, and I'm not. It breaks my heart. And it's because in our culture, we still really love aggressive, have all the answers, sharp, fast, quick-thinking males. And when females do that, then we say, I'm such a bitch. All right, 3s are aggressive like 8s, but they dress all that up. And unlike 8s, they would rather say too little rather than too much. But our culture loves 3s. They take shortcuts, they cut corners, they're politically savvy, they're trendy people, they can sell you almost anything. We love that. So they're very successful, but not always in the high side of their number. Sometimes they're successful in the low side of their number. Next to them is 4s. 4s are the most complex number on the Enneagram. What you see is not ever what you're going to get. There's always 10 or 12 other layers beneath that. They're very difficult to raise as children. I know that to be a fact because I've raised one. They are people who are comfortable in a melancholy mood. So we're always trying to cheer them up. But they don't need cheering up. They see the world differently than we do. They're the best people on the planet at bearing witness to pain. Do y'all have Stephen ministry here? They would be better Stephen ministers than anybody else. I'm a terrible Stephen. I'm a Stephen leader, and I'm a terrible Stephen minister because I'm a fixer. I don't bear witness to pain well. I can't stand it. So 4s, they bear witness to pain well. They're very complex. They want to be special. They want to be unique. They want to be seen as different from everybody else. They usually dress different from other people. Okay, so we've in the Feeling Triad there with 2s and 3s and 4s. So what does that mean in terms of feelings? Well, for 2s, what we feel is your feelings, not our own. When I'm really hurting, and Joe comes to me and says, what's wrong? When I'm really hurting, he usually puts his hands on my face and he says, what's wrong? I very seldom know. I don't know what I feel, and I very seldom know what I need. Because I've spent my entire 61 years feeling what you feel. So, 2s feel other people's feelings. 3s find feelings to really be messy. They block efficiency and they block effectiveness and they kind of get in the way. So what 3s do is they have their feelings, but they just set them aside to deal with later. And sometimes they get to them and sometimes they don't. So 3s on the Enneagram are of all the 9 numbers, they're the ones who deal with feelings least effectively, their own and other people's. And 4s don't like anything that's average. So if 4s have a sad feeling, they want it to be sadder. And if they're happy, they want to be happier. Not too long ago, I was talking to a young girl who had just broken up with her boyfriend. She's a 4 on the Enneagram. She was devastated. And I said, well, what are you going to do? And she said, well, my friends all invited me to go eat pizza and kind of hang out, but I'm going to go home. And I knew that's what she was going to say. Because you know what she's going to do when she gets home? She's going to listen to breakup songs on the radio so that she can be sadder than she already is. So in the 2, 3, 4 space, while that's the feeling triad, those are people who don't deal with feelings very well. Okay, so what if we just stopped right here and we thought about your, what do we call the church council now? The church council. You know, it changes names every once in a while. It's hard to keep up. Let's say you're at the church council. 4s are people who always focus on the flaws of whatever's proposed because they don't want to be disappointed later if it doesn't work out. So that's their way of thinking. So somebody presents a great idea and all the 4s kind of raise their hands and talk about why that is never going to work. The 3s talk about how you could do it in less time, more efficiently, and shine it up a little. The 2s talk about how much it's going to help other people and who's going to love us if we do that, and who we might offend if we do that. The 9s really only listen half the time. They look like they're listening. They even kind of nod occasionally like they're listening, but no, they catch about half. So they'll wait till the very end, say very little. Usually they're the people who kind of wrap things up. The 8s are usually the people who had the idea, think we ought to do it, and they'd be happy to be the leader. And the 1s are the people who are saying, well, you know, we could get sued if we do that. There could be a real problem if we do that, because they're thinking of all the imperfections in the plan. Okay, now let's move on around to 5s, 6s, and 7s. Now we're in the Head Triad. And these are folks who kind of like to live in their head, but also it's the Fear Triad. There are 2 schools of thought. Mine is the spiritual side, and there's a psychological side. In the spiritual school of thought, from the masters who taught Enneagram and handed it down, from which I got it, say that half of the world is 6s. And 6s are the core number of the Fear Triad. Half the world. Now, doesn't that just explain everything? Think about that. If half the world at their core are fearful, it explains how we sell many of the things we sell that we don't need that'll keep you safe. Not too long ago, I'd been teaching like 3 days in a row, and Joe and I were on the couch kind of just staring at the television. You know, that you don't care what's on and it really doesn't have your attention. I think we were watching a Law and Order I'd seen 11 times or something. So we're staring at the television, and all of a sudden they come with the lead-in for the nightly news on Channel 5, I think, or whatever. And the girl who reads the news thing says, "Stay tuned tonight for dishwasher danger." Really? I said to Joe, is our dishwasher dangerous? What is dishwasher danger? Well, dishwasher danger is something that catches the eye of 3.2 billion people who at their core are fear-centered. Now, all 5, 6, and 7 deal with fear differently, so I'm going to talk about them all. Let's talk about 5s first. 5s are people who don't like to be touched too much. They're people who kind of hold back, and they don't really like meetings. 5s are people who would say, committees are the unwilling asked by the unable to do the unnecessary. Right? And they don't tell you they love you a lot, but they support what you are interested in so that you'll know that they love you. And more than anything, they want to be sure that they end up with a private existence. So they live a pretty simple lifestyle so that they'll never have to depend on anybody for anything else. They can take care of themselves. And they are very fearful. And the way they deal with fear is with knowledge. So they gather knowledge. Would you give me a mint? Or water? Either one. They gather knowledge. Lots and lots of knowledge gathering. So they love the internet. But the problem with the internet is full of information. But you know, information is not knowledge, and knowledge is not wisdom. And so sometimes 5s are just gathering lots and lots and lots of information, okay? The more information they have about something, the safer they feel. 6s. Do y'all remember maybe 5 or 6 years ago when in the department stores at the malls, they had those kiosks kind of in the center of where aisles intersected? And at those kiosks, they had a game called the Worst Case Scenario game. No, you didn't see it? Well, I was teaching in in St. Louis not too long ago. Thank you. I was teaching in St. Louis not too long ago, and I was teaching the whole Enneagram workshop. Yes, she would love some water. I was teaching the whole Enneagram workshop, and I got to this example, and this girl stood up in the back, I don't know, maybe 200 people, and this girl stood up in the back and said, "That's me, I have that game, and everybody should have it. It's the best game ever invented." People in the room just kind of looked at her like, "Really?" She said, "Yeah, I can't tell you how much trouble it saved me. It saves me lots of trouble." Because here's how 6s deal with fear. They think of the worst possible thing that could happen, and then they make a plan for that. And 6s are the people who ask lots of questions. They're the people who, when you want the meeting to be over, raise their hand. And you think, please don't ask a question. And they do. And generally, questions are followed by with questions and more questions. And you know what? We should answer them. And here are 5 or 6 reasons why. 6s are the people who hold all of our groups together. They're the people who don't leave. They're the people who live by the values of our childhood, my childhood, which were church and community and family and government and education. And they stay. They don't get all caught in the rifts about different things. They're here. And even when you don't get it right, they'll be here. They won't give money, but they'll still be here if you're not getting it right. But there are also people, thank you so very much. I talked all day yesterday and all morning. And a long time last night, didn't I? So when we don't answer 6s, when we placate them and kind of pat them on the head and say, "Oh, don't worry, it'll be fine," 2 things happen. Number 1, it doesn't work for them. They still have all their questions. And number 2, we miss 2 things: seeing things in context and seeing things on a deeper level. So when we don't listen to 6s, when we move so quickly that we don't have time for 6s, I think we make a big mistake. So 6s are dealing with their fear by thinking of the worst thing that could happen and making a plan. Their problem, while their sin, there's a sin assigned to every number. And while their sin or their passion is fear, I would say a better word for that is anxiety, because 6s are always kind of worked up about what's not actually happening right now. And that's anxiety instead of fear, right? 7s. 7s are perhaps the most fun people on the Enneagram. They live with a half range of emotions. So if a full range of emotion is from here to here, and this is the sad half, well, 7s just kind of hang here, and they've been hanging in this half all their lives. They have a little trigger here that helps them not have to go on over here and deal with sad things. And as a result, they have to get pretty old before they can really accommodate very much sadness. We have a son who's a 4 and a son who's a 7. And our son who's a 7 is 28. And he can now kind of hold and work with some sadness without trying to get away from that. But it's taken him to 28 to be able to do that. The way 7s handle their fear is by having a smokescreen of activity. So they always keep their options open, and they always have lots of opportunities and lots of plans and lots of things that they might go do. They're really good about dreaming up new ideas and seeing where systems overlap. So in the first phase of a project, they're great. But they're not too good with the details that really come later on in the second phase of a project. So you have 6, 7s, and 8s. Now, let me go around and tell you, you have 5, 6, and 7s. Let me go around and tell you what the sin or the passion is for each number. I'm really iffy about the word sin. And the Enneagram has always used both sin and passion, or at least for the last 2,000 years. The reason I'm kind of iffy about sin is, we throw that word around a lot, and it's how we determine who's in and who's out, and I think determining who's in and who's out is a sin, so I'm kind of out of that conversation at the top. And yet, what I'm about to tell you is how you fall short, and you'll see that, I think. Okay, the sin for ones is anger, but I prefer to call it resentment. And that's kind of pushed down anger that kind of spews out. The sin for twos is pride. And the definition of pride in Enneagram language is an inability or an unwillingness to acknowledge one's own needs and suffering. So that means that I don't acknowledge my own needs, instead I just help you with yours. I just help you with your life instead of really figuring out what's going on inside of me. For threes, the sin is deceit. And deceit really for the three is about fooling themselves more than it's about lying to any of us. For fours, the sin is, I've been teaching for 3 days, very tired. I have to come back. For fives, the sin is avarice. And avarice is a word that is not jealousy, so don't go with that. And avarice doesn't mean, it's not stinginess or greed. Avarice doesn't mean greed. Avarice is about holding back just enough of what you need so that you can take care of yourself. And maybe fives hoard too much, but let me give you an example of avarice as opposed to selfishness. My best friend Carolyn is 9 years older than I am, and she's a 5 on the Enneagram, so her sin is avarice. She lives a very simple lifestyle. She never married and never had children, and so she's kind of been part of our family always and has always helped with our kids and all of that. And Carolyn's whole thing in helping with our kids has been from the beginning at the grocery store or at the gas station when they want something. Absolutely not. Can we have candy? No. Can we have Coke? No. Can we stop and get French fries? No. Can I have this toy? No. But when my kids graduated from high school, her gift to them was all of their college books. Because you see, all of your college books has value. And that's lasting value that'll help you take care of yourself. It's not a frivolous spend. So that's how fives kind of see the world. The sin for sixes is fear, and again, I kind of have renamed that anxiety because I think that works a little better for us. The sin for sevens is gluttony. But it's really not gluttony of things so much as it's gluttony of the mind. Sevens like to anticipate everything. And they love to make plans and dream about how things are going to be. Part of the problem they have in life is that the plans very seldom turn out to be what they really want them to be or how they want them to end up. And so they live with a lot of anticipation that ends in a lot of disappointment. And a lot of anticipation that ends in a lot of disappointment. Because if you ask them, they say that ordering from the menu is more fun than eating the dinner. Because the dinner really is always a disappointment. All right, for eights, we call eights the boss. And we call them the boss because they are so blasted aggressive. But they don't mean to be. They are never bullies. They would never bully you. Eights are the people who tell bullies to stop bullying. And you know why eights would never be bullies? Because they don't think about you that much. They wouldn't go home to think about how to get you. They think about ideas and plans and things they might do to move ahead. For nines, the sin is sloth. Have y'all ever seen a sloth? Anybody not seen Jack Hanna with a sloth on TV? They're those square animals with tails, and they move very slowly. And nines hate that's their sin is sloth. I'll tell you something that I learned just recently from Jack Hanna, and Joe's very sad that I know. He had sloths on David Letterman, and he said, Dave, sloths live in 3 trees for their whole lives, and they only come down once a week to go to the bathroom. And Joe looked at me immediately and said, please don't talk about that when you talk about nines. And you can see how effective that is. But what sloth really means in Enneagram terms is a desire to be unaffected by life. So, 9s just merge. The sin for 4s is envy. And envy is not jealousy. 4s are not jealous. 4s are envious. And what they're envious of is the way you live your life. Because you look so comfortable in the world to them, and they're so uncomfortable in the world. And so they don't want your house, they don't want your diamond ring, they don't want your car, they don't want your job. They want your way of being in the world. And when they watch you, you seem to be so comfortable and so happy, and they're so uncomfortable. And they have such a hard time kind of finding their way. You know, a long time ago, you remember the kids who used to be in the mall, and they were all dressed up in dark clothes and dark fingernail polish and lots of points and piercings and things. Well, I kind of decided I thought they were all 4s. So I went to the mall one day and said to a group of them, 8 or 9, can I buy y'all a hamburger? If I do, will you just talk to me for an hour? And they all said, sure. So I bought them all a hamburger, and they talked to me for an hour. And I said, how come you guys are all dressed alike? And they pretty much said, because we so desperately don't want to be dressed like the rest of you. Interesting, huh? Because we all do dress alike, essentially, don't we? And I said, so do you guys do drugs? No, drugs are for losers. I said, well, do you drink? No. People who drink are inauthentic. I said, well, do you stand around and kind of gossip about other people and how ineffective and how much you don't like the rest of us? And they said, good grief, no. Talking about you guys would be really boring. We don't talk about you. So all the stuff we made up about them, none of that's true. They're just all 4s. And 4s cannot stand inauthenticity. They can't stand it. So they've done everything they can to not be like us so they can be a little more authentic in their own way. Now there's a whole new group of them, and they dress kind of like the 60s hippies dressed now, and they're called emo kids. And emo stands for emotional, and that couldn't be any more in tune with the Enneagram. Because remember, 4s are the ones who always want their emotions to be higher if they're high and lower if they're low. So there are 9 individual ways of being in the world, and those 9 ways of being in the world have everything to do with being part of a greater whole. And in being part of a greater whole, what happens with those 9 individual ways of being is that we bring certain gifts to the table that nobody else brings, and we bring certain weaknesses or certain lacks to the table that other people don't bring. The thing I love, love, love about the Enneagram, though, is that what it gives us at the same time is an awareness of what our weakness is, and an awareness at the same time of what our gifts are that help us address that weakness. And so it's the only system that has to do with personality or with the way we are in the world that I know of that we have that you can do something with. I'm fine with the Myers-Briggs. That's a fine thing. I've known my Myers-Briggs letters since I was, 20? I bet many of you know yours too. So I'm an ENFJ. But I don't know what to do with that. E means I'm an extrovert. I don't see me becoming an introvert, do y'all? I mean, even with a lot of work, we're not going to get there. I think F has to do with feelings, and I don't see me getting out of that. So you see what I'm saying? It's good to know that we're different because we're INFPs and ENFJs and all of that, but what are you going to do with that? And how does that really help you have compassion for other people and for the ways that other people see the world? So here's kind of what we've got going. We have our own ministry that's a nonprofit that's non-denominational outside of any church. We have our own center that is on Cochran Chapel property because Cochran Chapel has 8 acres at Northwest Highway and Midway Road, and they invited us to build there, but we own our building. And what we're kind of trying to do there is make the world a more compassionate place by helping people understand how other people see and how other people respond and process the information that they take in. Now, what we do is on our board of directors, we have only aggressive numbers because they got a lot of business to do and they got to raise a lot of money for us. So we have 1s, 3s, 7s, and 8s. But on our advisory board, we have one of every number. So anytime we come to the table to try to figure out what we're going to do in terms of programming or helping other people, we have everybody represented because we have every personality at the type to represent the people who aren't there. As a result of that, we save ourselves a lot of time and a lot of energy. Now, the reason I want us to have it in the church is because, good gosh, the church has hurt enough people. It has hurt so many people. You know, I have to confess to you that one of my spiritual practices, and it takes a lot of spiritual practices if you're me. I have to do like an hour and a half a day to kind of stay between the lines. But one of my spiritual practices is every Sunday, I get up and I listen to the pastor of First Baptist Dallas before I go teach my Sunday school class and go worship at our church. And here's why I do that. Because I don't agree with him about anything. But you know what? He very earnestly believes everything he believes. And until I can call him and say, you know, I'd like to have lunch, and sit at the lunch table with him and not have to change him, then I am him. You see that? If I have to change him, I'm no different than him trying to change me. If I think I have all the answers and he's wrong about everything, which, by the way, I do, then I'm him because he thinks he has all the answers and he thinks I'm wrong about everything. You see what I'm saying? So I'm the very thing that I don't want to be, right? So here's how close I am to calling to invite him to lunch, where I'm going to let him just be who he is and I'm going to be who I am. Joe has said that if I ever do it, he will rent an airplane with one of those banners behind it that says, today's the day. So if I ever think that's going to be flying over Plano, I'll let one of you know and you can let the others know that I'm on my way. But the important thing about that is, I don't know his story. I don't know why he is who he is, how he is, why he believes what he believes. I don't know any of that. Only because of the Enneagram do I have enough compassion to think that I might want to know. Because his way of being in the world, he's been that way since he was 5. Just like my way of being in the world, I've been that way since I was 5. And so have you. So I don't know a better way for us to begin to talk to one another about our differences than one where we can use numbers instead of names. I work in an organization part-time called My Treehouse. I do adult education for them, and My Treehouse is an organization for adopted children and their families. And I am an adopted child, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to work in that organization. But we teach Enneagram to the little kids by using animals. And I think half of them get their numbers right or their animals right and half get it wrong, but it doesn't matter because we're using it as a communication tool. Because adopted children are afraid to tell their parents how they really feel about anything. They're afraid you're just going to give them away again, right? So it doesn't bother them at all, though, to say, you know, when lions talk really loud to turtles, it scares the turtle. Now, a kid can say that to a mom who's an 8 when the child is a 9, when they can't say, please don't talk loud to me because it scares me. You see what I'm saying? And they have all kinds of compassion for one another now. So here are all these little bitty people who say, don't be mean to her. She's just a 4. She'll be around in a while. She never dresses like us. Just ignore that. It's fascinating how much compassion they have that we could also have if we would begin to recognize that we all fit in one of these spaces. So there's 2 shockers that come with that. And one is, I know that you thought that you were the only special, unique you, and that there's just nobody else like you in the whole world. And there are millions of people who see the world the way you see it and who process information the way you process it. And yet you are one of only 9 ways of being and seeing in the world. So every place I use the Enneagram, we've started in our ministry a big program working with veterans and their families using the Enneagram, and it's fascinating. I've just started this year using Enneagram in the addiction community here in Dallas because I had a theory that it turns out it looks like it's going to be correct, that if people learn their number when they're sober, The journey toward relapse is predictable, patterned behavior that can be observed if you know this system. So we're using that clinically now in some groups. And so I believe this. I don't know where the Enneagram came from, but I think God wants us to have it. I'm thankful that it's been across all faith beliefs, because that means that there is a common language we could ultimately all use. I think it shouldn't be taught by people who don't know what they're doing, and I think I should be teaching it because I think it's mine to do. And I think it would make all the difference in the intersection between personality, spirituality, and relationship and community. Because if you get together and there are things you don't agree about, you don't agree in a completely different way if you know the Enneagram than if you don't. And then you don't put down people who are afraid. And you don't put down people who you think always think they have the answers. And you don't put down people who are always, ones are people, you know what they do? They reload the dishwasher. You know those people? They kind of lean on the counter and sigh heavily and move all the dishes around that you just put in the dishwasher like you're an idiot and you don't know how to do it, right? It's fascinating. I'm sorry, I didn't know. But one of my favorite things about talking about the Enneagram is, and y'all have been doing it the whole time, there's a lot of punching and pointing that goes on while I do that. So that's what I feel like my gift is to bring to the table to enhance the way we communicate with one another. And now I'm happy to answer any questions you have with a response, at least, maybe not an answer. And I'm happy to entertain any thoughts you have or anything that you want to say.
What we'd like to do is make sure that we're using the mic. So if you have questions, give me just a moment to get the mic to you, and Suzanne can respond or answer your questions. Anyone?
Is it possible to be a number in a subclass of another number?
That's a great question. I didn't know I'd get to talk about this. Okay, let's just talk about me, because that's my favorite topic. No, I'm not kidding. Look at 2s up there, okay? Now, the number on either side of you is your wing. And the general belief is that we have one wing for the first half of life and the other wing for the second half of life. And all it does is provide some balance for you. But you might have a lot of behavior from your wing. You could be a dead-on 2, or you could be a 2 that's almost up there by the 1, but you're still a 2. So you'd have a lot of 1 behavior. But you remember at the first I talked today about the reality that Enneagram number is determined by your motivation, not by your behavior. So Joe and I, as a 9 and a 2, often do the very same thing. My motivation is, at the end of the day, I want you to want me, and I want you to love me. Joe's motivation at the end of the day is he doesn't want any conflict, and he wants to feel like his presence matters. So it's not what we do, but it's why we do it that determines where you fit here. So yes, you might have a really strong wing. We both have a fairly strong 1 wing. So our children say it's just like living with a 1 in the house, because we both have a lot of that perfectionist tendency going on in us. Now, there's a second piece that's really important, and I don't think your Enneagram has arrows on it, because I didn't think about talking about that today. But if you follow the 2 and you see the line that goes up to the 8, well, if I was going to talk to you today about stress and security, there would be an arrow there on the 2 that goes to the 8, and then on the 4 that goes to the 2. And if you're a 2 on the Enneagram, what happens is you bottom out in your own number when you're really stressed, and bottoming out means you just behave badly in your own number. So when I'm very stressed, I help everybody with everything, I don't need any help with that business. Helping me. I help everybody with everything, and even when they don't want my help, okay, or when it's not mine to do. But then I take on some 8 energy. And you remember 8's that aggressive number that doesn't have any problem saying, no, I'm not doing it. So I have access in a non-static system like the Enneagram, if I'm really stressed, to some 8 energy. When I feel very secure, I also have access to some 4 energy, which is where the other line goes. And when I'm doing a writing project right now, I can't write unless I've got some 4 energy. That's where my creative energy comes from. Richard Rohr, who's the master who taught me, says that your personality taps you on the shoulder every 10 seconds. And so for me, every 10 seconds, generally, I feel like I have to connect to somebody. I have to see if somebody still loves me. I have to see if we're okay. I have to do all of that. Every 10 seconds, one's kind of have to straighten up something just a little bit, or perfect something, or make something right. See what I'm saying? So the Enneagram is not only not static in terms of going around, even though you're the same number all your life, but it's also not static in terms of moving up and down, because within your number, some days you'll be really healthy, some days you'll just be average, and some days you'll be below average, and then there's another category down here that is pathology, and I'm not a therapist, so I choose not to deal with that, but I teach Enneagram to therapists who do use that space down there. Good question.
Other questions?
You talk about givers, but in my view, there's a whole lot of opposites of that. The takers, the ones that don't care about, helping others, or they have maybe my view of the world, because I can already tell you I'm a 1 with a very strong 9. And so can you talk about where they fit?
The takers?
Yeah.
Did you say you think you're a 1 with a 9 wing? And is that based on what I said today, or do you know that from somewhere else? You hear the voices? Yeah, that's the giveaway right there. You know these other people don't hear voices, don't you? I'm just kidding. All right, well, the reason I'm clarifying that with you is because that is a very 1 thing to say. 1s believe that they are giving up the things that they would like to do for what ought to be done, because their buzzwords are must and should and ought. And as they do and do and do to try to make the world a better place, they get very frustrated with their observation that other people aren't giving as much as they are and aren't trying as hard as they are. But generally you find that around the Enneagram, other people are giving and they're doing too. They just do it in a completely different way. So for example, 8s they're not tender. They don't look like givers. But 8s are fighting for justice. When I work with missionaries teaching the Enneagram, a high percentage of missionaries are 8s, because they're the only people on the Enneagram who can take on dictators in the cause for justice for the poor at the same time. So that's one piece of that answer. A second piece is, I kind of think that we who want to be in ministry of any kind, which is all of us, or most of us maybe, and we might not call it ministry, we might call it helping or whatever. There are 2 kinds of ministers. There are prophetic ministers and priestly ministers. And prophetic ministers are me. I'm not good going in one-on-one, dealing with people and all that stuff, but I'm good at getting people to go help people. I'm good at teaching people what their gifts are so they can go help people. So I think there really is more of a balance than you would think around the Enneagram of givers and takers. And I think at times we're all givers and we're all takers, and we generally do that in ways that are based on personality. So here's an example. As a 9, Joe cannot help but see both sides of everything. 9s are natural mediators. That's how they see. So sometimes it looks like to me he's not giving because he's not forthcoming with his opinion, he's not forthcoming with advice, he's not standing and taking a strong stand on something. But that's because in his head there are 2 sides to everything, and he has to work all that through first. So I think if we end up doing the 8 hours, or if you ever come to my center and come hear the Enneagram and hear the whole thing taught, I think you'll see that more people are doing more than you think with the gifts that they have. Your gifts are generally just more overt. It's hard to trust that, but I think I'm right.
Just briefly, 2 things. I think I'm a 9 and I think I'm a 5, and I don't see how those come together at all.
Okay, well, let me answer that first, and let me just say this to you. You shouldn't think you're anything based on what I said today. It takes me 40 minutes to teach each number. That's why you can only do it in 2 hours. And let me also say The Enneagram's an oral tradition. There's a test that's floating around. Our experience is it's wrong 62% of the time. This is an oral tradition, and it takes a long time to teach every number. So I wouldn't want you to go away tonight thinking you know your number or anybody else's. What I want you to do is go away wanting to know your number. But the overall picture that I'm trying to give you is a walk away where you understand that other people are just not like you. And so you cannot build community, true community, with other people unless you understand that. So I'm gonna go out on a limb here. I was going to try to do this whole thing without going out on a limb. And I'm going to say this. How many of you would consider yourself fundamentalists? That makes this much safer. Okay.
These are Methodists, you know.
Just a little aside. I teach the Enneagram at Baylor University 3 times a year. And I taught the faculty the last time I was there. And I said to the Baylor faculty, how many of you are fundamentalists? And nobody raised their hand. I know, I know, and I don't know. I don't know. My executive director said they're lying. But I don't know. Here's what I do know. If you think about fundamentalism, and if you ever wonder why those churches are growing, and why so many people are there, and why so many people across faith beliefs, not just ours, but across all faith beliefs are buying into fundamentalist, old ways of thinking and doing and all that button down, strong rules of who's going to heaven and who's going to hell and all that. Well, you know who's in those churches? Unhealthy sixes. Because they're afraid. And when somebody stands up and says to them, you don't need to be afraid because I have all the answers. And we have a little pamphlet outside. It's very lovely. And if you read those 14 things, you too will have all the answers. And if you have any questions, those can be answered in that pamphlet, and that pamphlet. So, sixes don't trust themselves. Half the world doesn't trust themselves. So who are they going to trust? Somebody who says, I got the answer. Right? So I don't even know what that's in reference to, but it seems like you need to know that. Okay, so we don't know if you're a 5 or a 9, but we're not going to know today. So what else you want to know?
Just quickly, my personality has changed so much since my husband died.
Right.
The unmarried me is a totally different person than the married me. And I don't know, that's just a remark. You talked about personalities falling away, so I guess life circumstances and age would cause that.
And I think what happens then is the reason, because your number never changes. So what happens is you just get either healthier or more bitter. So you get more trapped in your personality and farther away from essence, or you get less trapped in your personality and closer to essence.
Okay. Come on over here.
Thanks, Mike. Quick question. Do you see, and I think you've already answered this just in what you said before about the sixes, do you see people falling in certain professions in accordance with personalities? You were talking about Joe seeing both sides. That would sound like someone that would be able to be a counselor, that kind of thing.
Right. There are all numbers in all professions, but we have intuitive gifts for certain professions. So, 9s are very good ministers, counselors, mediators, public relations. They do all of that really well. 5s, let's think about a 5. Remember I told you they don't like to be touched much, and they got to have plenty of space, and they kind of need to stay home, and they like to read books, and they have kind of a minimalist lifestyle. Joe came to me early in our years in ministry, and he said, Suzanne, I need you to sit down because I have to talk to you about something. When I have to sit down, I'm always in trouble. And I sit quite a bit, actually. And he said, not everybody likes to be touched. And I said, you're kidding. That had never dawned on me, that everybody didn't like to be touched. He said, no, everybody, especially Mr. Smith. He really doesn't like it when you come in the back of the church and rub his bald head. I said, okay. Now, let's imagine Mr. Smith and at the public relations desk at Target the day after Christmas. Okay? So I bring my toaster, right? And I say, hi, I brought back my toaster. What's wrong with your toaster? Well, it's a 2-slotted toaster and I really wanted a 4-slotted toaster. Mr. Smith would say, well, then why didn't you buy a 4-slotted toaster? Joe Stabile would say, man, I understand. You know, I've had the hardest time deciding between a 2-slotted toaster and a 4-slotted toaster. I would say, bless your heart. Did you not have what you needed for breakfast? See what I'm saying? 6s would say, you know, I've read the stuff on the 4-slotted toasters, and they're not as safe as the 2-slotted toasters. I mean, we all come at everything differently, but some of us have unique gifts for certain things.
Thank you.
So, I'll tell you, I think most pastors of really large churches are 3s. 3s are people who get things done. They make you believe that you can be bigger and better. Our executive director was the first woman to ever work up from the basement at Baylor Hospital as a physical therapist to be the president of one of Baylor's hospitals. And she left that, president of Baylor's Hospital for Rehabilitation, because God called her to work with us as our executive director. She's worked with us for 3 years and we've grown 600%. Only 3s can do that for you. We would have grown 25% in the last 3 years otherwise. So we definitely have different gifts for different things. And maybe there's nothing sadder than somebody who's in a job or a vocation that they don't have the gifts for.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Back here.
He asked my question, but I have another one.
Okay.
Did you ever say what the sin was for number 4?
Envy.
Envy. All right, thanks.
But it's not jealousy.
Okay.
Okay? So 4s are not jealous. They don't covet, they desire. And their desire, their envy is about comfort. To us, to them, we all seem so comfortable in the world, and they're so uncomfortable. There are fewer 4s than any other number and in the world, and 4s come up to me and say, nobody gets me. And I say, that's correct. Nobody does. You're absolutely right. And you get to indulge in the fact that nobody really understands you. However, Thomas Merton is a 4 on the Enneagram with a big 5 wing. So if you look at the bottom of the Enneagram, that spans the space from feeling, from heart space to head space. And if you have both of those on board, you can talk to almost anybody. So he's published in every known language on the globe. So you can get there, but it's hard to be a 4. Very, very, very hard.
This is something I've never heard of before, but it seems somewhat plausible that there'd be a finite number of personality types, and why not 9? But my question is, who's the judge of what my type is?
You.
And how much confidence can I have?
How
in
much?
that confidence can I have in that judgment? I mean, do you ever change your mind?
About your number? Yeah, no. And let me really speak to that. First of all, in terms of 9 and all that business, there are Enneagram masters who know all the math and all that goes with this, and I'm so glad they do, and I can tell you who they are, any of you, if you'd like to read them. I don't know it, and I'm not going to know it. I mean, I can't numbers are not my gift. People are. So, but that exists, and you can get all of that. What I would say about confidence, there are 2 things I want to tell you. And the first is, I'm not putting anybody in a box. I'm showing you the box you're already in. All I'm doing is describing the box that you've always been in. And when you hear the 40 minutes, with one exception, there's one number that doesn't always get it, but when you hear it, you'll know that that's your number. I always ask people to think about when they were 20, because life means that we've had to take some of the edges off and we've had to give up some things that would be our normal way of being in the world. And I ask people to think about how they are when they're at home. Now, when a tragedy happens and we lose somebody and we are different than we used to be, we are different, but our motivation isn't different. Our way of being in the world is just different. We still see the world the same way. We're still motivated by the same stuff, but we have to make different choices. And what that leads me to talk about is the fact that I think there's a big difference between change and transformation. And what we who are here on a Sunday afternoon to listen to the folks that y'all have had come from Perkins, and it's quite an impressive list, actually. I don't know if y'all noticed that it was PhD, 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 Suze, PhD, PhD, but I noticed. But the thing that we're here about is spiritual growth of some kind, transformation of some magnitude of experience that makes some sense, and not just change. And I think change is what occurs when you take on something new. I think transformation is what occurs when something old falls away, somebody you love, somebody you've shared your life with, is no longer there, and it's usually beyond your control. And those transformative experiences have a tendency to help us get closer back to essence so that we're more in charge of our personality rather than our personality being in charge of us. Either you drive it or it drives you. And let me give you a perfect example of that. My parents were highly evolved. I was very lucky to be adopted by them. My dad delivered me in the middle of the night. They had boys 18 and 15. They had never even discussed adopting a baby. And my dad went home for breakfast and said to my mother, "I think we should adopt a little girl." And she said, "I think you need more coffee." So to make a long, kind of fun story a little bit shorter, they decided to adopt me, and a lot of things happened around my adoption that were good. Floydade is a lovely town, and yet I was always Doc and Sue Guthrie's adopted daughter. And at 61, I still am their adopted daughter, even though they're no longer here. My mom died at 92, and Joe came to me 2 years later and said, "You know, Suze, I've been thinking a lot about you and your desire to know something about your biological mother, and if we're going to do this, we better get it done." And I've kind of done what I can do on the internet, and I can't find anything. But based on the information we had from my father's medical records, he thought we could probably do okay if we hired somebody. So we hired a man to find my biological mother. And I'd been teaching for a number of years, and we had been attending conferences for years before that at the Center for Action and Contemplation in Albuquerque, and they always had their big events at the Albuquerque Hotel in Old Town. And it turned out it took the guy that Joe hired 18 hours to find my birth mother, and she lived right across the street from the Albuquerque Hotel. So I had been that close to her all those years. But when we contacted her, she wouldn't see me, and she ended up never seeing me. But Father Rohr and his group of folks had a board member who lived in the same set of condos where my birth mother lived, and he had the idea that I had every right to see her and to try to talk to her maybe just for an hour. So he had his board member watch for when she came home. The board member called, we were sleuthing, and Joe and Richard and I go to my birth mother's house. So here I am, I have Joe standing on this side of me, praying, praying, praying. And Father Rohr is over here, and he's praying, 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 and I'm knocking on the door, right? And we walked across the street from the hotel. She didn't answer. And we knew she was there, and she didn't answer. And I guess we were there 15 or 20 minutes, and I didn't want to stop knocking. And finally, Joe just put his hand around my back and said, we need to go. So we walked across the street. Now, you remember twos are helpers. Don't forget that. That's my personality. And you remember I told you you bottom out in your own number first when you're really stressed. So we walk across the street, and there is a guy who works for the Albuquerque Hotel who is helping take somebody's bags out of the back of their car. And I walked right up to him and said, "Can I help you with those bags?" And he looked at me and he said, "No, ma'am." I said, "Are you sure? I'm happy to help." And he's looking around like, he said, "Well, no, ma'am." So Joe again put his arm around me and said, "Come on, we just need to go." Now, I'm no spiritual giant or guru, but I've done a lot of work on me. And I've done a lot of work with the Enneagram, and I've had a spiritual director for a long, long time. And still, in that moment of enormous pain, I went right back to the same old immature, unhealthy behavior of thinking, if I help you carry the bags, then you'll want me. And right now, I just need to be wanted. Took me a little while to get a little 8 energy going so I could be mad. And then I got angry, and then all that settled down, and then I got back to who I am. And so the reason you ultimately always know that that's you is because there will continue to be those moments when you just, in face of whatever's in the world, do what you've always done to make your way. And we all do it in the numbers that we're all in. So another example I could give you is ones are people who, in their lives, they have one part that's perfect, always. And the rest might be a disaster, but one part of their life is going to be perfect. So I have a brother-in-law, and every part of his life is perfect. You know, the garage, their garage floor is way cleaner than your kitchen floor unless you're a one. I mean, everything's always perfect at their house, okay? And we have another man in our community who has rheumatoid arthritis, and he grew up Church of Christ scientists, and so they couldn't have docs. And so he didn't get a doctor until he was in his mid-20s, so his arthritis had advanced so far that he has had a very difficult time. When he first came into our community, he could still walk, but now he's confined to a chair. And he's a 1 on the Enneagram. Well, as long as he could perfect his things in his world, then he could kind of hold his anger down. But now he can't keep things perfect anymore. And so his anger just pops all the time. He's done a lot of work. He doesn't want to be angry. He doesn't want to say angry things and act in angry ways, but he can't help it. He just can't control that. And so you have that part of you. And I would never assign a number to anybody. I didn't assign numbers to my own children. I waited till they were old enough to figure it out for themselves. Once, if I taught you the whole deal and I said to you, now don't go around assigning numbers to people, then I would back that right up with, I know you're going to. And so since I know you're going to, I would ask you just to leave room for the fact that you might be wrong. Because at any given time, you don't know what anybody's motivation is or what they've just experienced or why they're helping the guy who works at the hotel unload bags from somebody else's car. That help? Want more? I'm an unending font of Enneagram.
Suzanne, thank you very much. How delightful and how appropriate if we can take this and work at our compassion and come to a greater understanding of that compassion. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
I will certainly do what I can to encourage Alex to put together the more detailed program that Suzanne gives, and I know Alex will be asking me for input. We will be distributing a survey for you because we're exploring other ways of doing this next year. She'll probably send that to you by email. I thought I might have hard copy, but I don't today, so please consider that and complete that survey as well. And we will have a class next Sunday at 11 o'clock, room 150, North Inn 158. I can assure you I've not been through the program, so if you come with any difficult questions on the Enneagram, I'll be every bit as lost, if not more lost than you are. But we can discuss it, we can talk about it, and maybe that will be a good motivation to get involved in the more complete program as well.
Yes. The first one I would recommend is Father Richard Rohr's book, and it's spelled R-O-H-R. And the title is The Enneagram, A Christian Perspective. Secondly, if you go to our website, I probably have 25 sets of CDs that are all workshops on the Enneagram, and they're all different ways of using the Enneagram. Enneagram in Scripture, Enneagram in prayer, Enneagram in relationships. It's on and on and on. But you would need to start with the Know Your Number, and that comes in CDs and DVDs. And our website, I have cards back there, I feel sure, but I'll give it to you. Our website is www.enneagram, lifeinthetrinitymministry.com. We tried to get LTM, but it was gone. So we have lifeinthetrinitymministry.com. In the. Mm-hmm. And all my CDs are also on Amazon.
Thank you again, Suzanne, and thank you all for participating. We appreciate it.
Thank you.